Hello and welcome to Making It Here. I'm your host, Brant, and this is my co-host,
Selina.
We're here today interviewing my father, Farley, and asking him a few questions. This is our first episode. Bear with us. We're learning as we go. So I think the first thing, just to backtrack a moment, is that Making It Here is a question to local people, essentially how they made it to this region, how they made their products, and how have they survived. So first question is, how did you get to this place in Westbank, British Columbia, Canada?
I guess it started around 1949 when I was born, and my father was here since 1909, except during the Second World War, and so he came back after it's actually the First World War and settled here in the valley. So, and then he finally came over to Westbank and settled finally in Westbank, where he purchased properties and continued farming and working as a fruit inspector, as well as doing many other hobbies which he loved, from beekeeping to raising cattle and any of his interests at the time, I suppose. So he purchased this property from one of the Galatleys in 1940, and I think 20 or 30 years before he passed on, he passed this property on to me, and so I've had it for 30 or more years. So from the last 30 years, we've been planting trees and continuing on, furthering more what he started, which he loved doing. So he loved growing fruit. He loved interacting with people. So he was a great person for encouraging healthy living, healthy growing of fruit. And he was always concerned about our environment. So he really was careful when he applied pesticides or any chemicals of any kind. He really tried not to use any if possible. So he planted his fruit in a very mixed way, where he didn't just practice monoculture. He would plant pears in his apples and cherries in his peaches, and so he started, that kind of growing early on. And
I think I just want to step back again a little bit and say, just to focus on the beautiful origins. So if I understand it right, you pretty much are born into this region, born into this industry, born into this farmland. And so there's a pretty big gap. You mentioned birth at 49, and then about 30 years ago, received this property from your father. So what do you remember growing up though in this area? What was the highlights that you enjoyed about finding yourself here?
well, there were a lot of highlights, and we need to be grateful for whatever we have. And but it wasn't always just good things. There was difficult times with a lot of things, because the times weren't easy for anybody really, because the fruit growers have always had a hard time. And so having a mixed type of farm where we didn't just produce fruit, we produced honey, we produced vegetables. We had lots of variability and lots of different things we could do. So we had an interesting life in many ways because, in the wintertime, there was cattle to look after too as well. So we were busy in the wintertime as well. So it has been a really busy life and an interesting life because my father loved people and he always encouraged visitors, and so we had lots of people around all the time. And so because he encouraged people, we always had people at the dinner table. So interesting people from all over the world that would just happen to come by, or visitors from the prairies, because a lot of prairie people used to come and preserve their fruit right on our property and then take it back as canned fruit. So they would come for a few days and can it right on the property. So it was a nice
Being
thing.
the other side of the host, so what part did your mother play in all this? She must have had a big part on the farm as well.
No, my mother stayed back and she was a quiet person. So
But I meant
she
not
just
canning and
she just
cooking for people and...
well, of course, but her manner was that just to work with everybody that came in and to be a quiet background worker, where she wasn't in the limelight very much because she didn't live that way. She believed it was better to try to create diplomacy and working with everybody and quietly in the background. So
That's what I mean, but you deserve a lot of credit for that that part of life. The people in the background are quite often very important, even if they're not out there. So I just wanted to give her that credit.
well, my mother didn't get a lot of credit, I don't think, for her work, and because of her attitude, it was so very beautiful that she didn't complain or criticize very little at all of anything. So her manner was very conducive to the farm life, where she didn't speak up that much unless she was really needed to speak up. She was a very happy person who stayed in the background.
So as you experienced this diversity growing up, meeting people, many different farming inputs, of cattle, and were they milking the cows, and you're looking after bees and fruit, vegetables, preserves. And you mentioned your father was a fruit inspector, and so he would have been, I imagine, visiting many of the other farms in the areas and also involved with the packing and collection and distribution of fruit. And so all of this formed the foundation, I imagine, that you had. And at what point did you decide what you wanted to do with your life? And what did you decide?
To really decide was not something I did very much. It was more of a working with whatever happens, and trying to deal with the present moment. So it wasn't a long-term plan that I would, looking to the future, where I would know. I just tried to fulfill whatever came in a happy way if possible, where because of the changes going on, we're having to adapt to this change every day and every moment. So although I knew I loved growing things from an early age, so I had a flower garden from age 5 right on. So wow. I grew flowers from a very early age. And I love growing flowers. So then the fruit growing was close to that. But to really enjoy everything. It's been a challenge over the years because of the changing earth and the changing planet, of how it does change it's changing very quickly from the 1,500 people that used to live here when I grew up to now 30,000 people. And
Yeah.
whereas other communities like haven't grown that much, like tiny communities in Kootenays, like Nakusp is still 1,500 people. You know, it hasn't changed really, like the Okanagan. So it's adapting to the Okanagan changes, which have been very, very quick.
So so you found yourself, you know, from a young age enjoying growing things and having all this exposure. So then when it came up, you know, how long have you been working on this property? Like for how much of it has it been in production for the farm?
Well, I guess we worked on it from my recollection, it's the early 60s. So, and, you know, my mother said when she was first married, she was up here thinning apples, you know, for my father. So in the 40s. So she worked here too. So it's been a while, and over the years you just continue working every day, and time goes by fast. So you know
it does.
And it just goes by so fast that, you know, every day is another day that we don't have. So that we have to say goodbye to. So
Yeah.
So how did you meet Farley?
How did I meet Farley? Well, I actually met him because I met some students who were studying philosophy under a lady that teaches, and I went to classes, and Farley was at classes. And so I sort of got to know him there through, we did the same study, and we had meetings every week or a couple of times a week, and that's how that happened. And then my kids were taken out of school, so Farley had an education degree. So when I pulled them out of school, he used to come out to the house and just check some of the work that they had done to make sure everybody didn't complain, even though they were learning more out of school than they learned in it. And
how old were they?
5 and 3, I think, when my 2 older children, when I took them up there. And then Randy started up there when I pulled him out of kindergarten, actually. So then Atlanta started doing a different education program and started teaching them a new way to think.
And so what were some of the incorporated things that were brought into that teaching?
Well, our teacher it was a new way of teaching where she said all the children have all the intelligence they need within them, and you just have to have a teacher that can bring it out. So she said there's no such thing as a stupid child, it's a bad teacher, because they have to bring out the knowledge that's already in them. So that's what she was trying to do with the new education, and the kids did really well under it. Like they learned how to do just about everything, as you did, because you were, never entered a school system, and you learned everything you needed to know, and you're quite creative because of it. So,
Farley, about what aspects are brought into the schooling, like that you first of all learned, and then, with our life teacher Atlanta, what did you bring in from that to the kids before I was around?
The new type of education which is needed, which had not been really practiced very much, in Canada, was very new to me too. So it was.
Yeah. Just from my own perspective of the background, the components that I was trying to
Okay.
sort of squeeze out,
That
the
we're missing?
components, I think are a lot of things that was experience from the Montessori and Waldorf schools was incorporated into my background and my, the children's upbringing, as well as very ancient wisdom, Hermetic wisdom, as well as the New Thought movement, which brought about an understanding of the most ancient tenets of healthy living and said, okay, how do we use this in a modern age and a modern society? And this melding, as well as the acknowledgement of mathematical principles, and to understand that what we think is what we create in life, I think all came together in the background. And I think it reshaped both of your lives, and it also brought you together. And so without all of those principles that were amalgamated into a greater understanding of existence and a greater teaching and the greater tools that we can use for successful lives, not only would either of you probably be here today and you wouldn't have the health that you have, but I think you also wouldn't have met in the first place. And so all of that came together. Would you say that really how you farm and how you've been successful at growing things and having your income supported and whatnot has been because you built on those principles?
Yes, I think the principles that we've learned, that I've learned and that I've been taught by, they're all coming together and making it a more successful way of life where there's always challenges, but to overcome them is the key to it all. So as long as we've put forth that effort, there's always going to be a solution. Not always the way we want it, but it's always a learning process. So to try to figure out, where we made errors, where we need to go, and like we had a lot of wasted fruit, like the packing house in West Bank, they had hundreds of bins of wasted fruit, and they dumped it in a field just down in West Bank. And so back in the 80s, I suppose it was, there was 10 bears there living there and eating the fruit, and we saw there was wastage going on in a big way. So, and we didn't like the wastage of the fruit, because you can cut a tiny piece out of the apple. You don't have to throw it away. And the industry throws it away or makes it into juice. But their type of juice is not healthy, I don't think. But there's so much wastage in our food industry. And so making juice was a way to not waste all the fruit that was being thrown out. And so you went into juicing because of that. But we've always thought that to throw fruit away, like the packing house in West Bank was just dumping it.
Yeah.
And so then now we had a problem with bears. So
Yeah, and so 15 years ago we started making these juices, and it was really because Farley had learned how to grow quality fruit, organic, beautiful fruit. And then when you see this highest quality of flavor and color, and nutrients, and then you see that you can't just always sell it fresh 100% of the time, in its prime. And so being able to preserve it, it's cold pressed, unfiltered, with no additives, no alteration, just wash it, squeeze it, and put it in a bottle. And then we know that we're getting the maximum quality. And the reason the quality is there is because of this land and because of this grower. And recognizing that, and that's what can be carried on into the future. And that's what I guess, would be one of my questions as well, is what do you see as the legacy that arriving here, even though by birth rather than by travel, arriving here, learning what you've learned, and living this lifestyle of principle, what do you see that's then building for the future for others?
I think the legacy is mostly, the example that we're doing right now is how do we keep farming in a very healthy way, because the future needs this really badly, to have healthy food in the future. Because of the way we're going right now is probably not the right way. We need to have healthier food. And like some countries, like Germany, say, they test the food or the fruit and the vegetables that's put out on their retail counters. They test it very, very frequently to see that, make sure that it's healthy. Like Canada doesn't really test the food, and so, but we need to be testing our food.
Do you think that even organic is still just a step, that we really need to be beyond organic into really working with nature more than ever?
Big organic that has happened in many places, and big organic doesn't necessarily put back into the soil what they take out. So until regulations say that you need to build up your own soil without bringing in additives from other properties, so it's better to just rely on your own property if you can. And people then will eat the food around them, which I think is better than bringing food in from hundreds of miles away. If people eat Okanagan grown fruit, it's better than, because they live in this area, maybe they should be eating Okanagan fruit more so. And we had a thriving vegetable industry in the Okanagan. There was a lot of vegetables, a lot of canning of vegetables in the Okanagan, but we haven't had that since the 30s and 40s. Like, my aunts and uncles used to grow a lot of vegetables, and they're not doing that. Of course, they passed on, but a lot of our properties now just grow monoculture grapes, monoculture fruit.
Yeah. And I guess just because we've talked lots about sort of how Farley got here, how did you get here? So you said you grew up in the prairies.
Yes, I grew up in another versatile farm in the prairies. It was more grain farming, of course, but we all worked together as a family. And then when I finished school, I married Ross, and he was a drywaller. So we ended up going to Lethbridge and then Vancouver. And then eventually we came here, and then that's how I got here.
But then when you got here, if I understand it right, you realized that your life needed to go in a different direction. And so that was when you and Ross separated, and you quit drinking and changed your diet, changed your name.
And eating meat and everything all in one night, because the classes were, and to teach anew, I always felt there was something wrong, and I really dreaded the fact when my kids had to go to school. And so it was just a blessing to meet Atlanta and find out they didn't have to.
That they could learn more principles and more
exactly,
skills.
And have more guidance, and not have all the bad influences that are out there, and not meet all the drug dealers. And like, they were very fortunate to do that. And I was very inspired by that. And when you have that new thing, like I said, I gave up even the odd drink and meat and everything all in one night, because I was so inspired with this new way of life, and I've never regretted that. So,
and you might think, for me, you might have said that I was I was growing up in the same, like both of you grew up from birth, working the land and doing things. And interestingly for me, although I grew up around both of you, of course, and learned from both of you, I really was more solitary, reading in nature, around the gardens, around the farm, around the work, but really trying to figure out where my own mind was. And so learning all of these things, and then it was more after 10 years old where I started doing more of the practical work and more of the farm work and gardening and growing flowers with Farley and working with Selina, and then to realize that the gift of all these things, the experience that both of them had, and the combined intelligence and principles that carried both of them forward to meet, for me to be created and have this opportunity to live this life also. And it's just been the greatest blessing.
Even though we all lived separate lives, like Farley was at Westbeck, I was in Peachland, Brant was most of the time in Peachland there, but at philosophy 3 times a week we were all in the same place. And yeah, it was quite interesting. We're glad you came. At least I am.
So a total picture, it's hard to paint a picture of exactly how everything happened, but the learning has always been, and it's always been a challenge, but the lives have been very good in many ways. So and it hasn't certainly been full of challenges, but the inspiration part of it has been always there. So to enjoy, like a lot of people come here to the farm and they say, wow, is it quiet here? A lot of people really enjoy the quietness. And, whereas down in West Bank, there's traffic noise continuously. And here, you can hear yourself think much more easily. So this property is very nice because it's quieter. So we're lucky in many ways to have a quieter spot for people to come. And people come every day here in the summertime to walk around the orchard, pick some fruit, sense a little closer to nature what's going on in their lives as well. So we're really lucky to have people from all over the world come here, especially July, August, September, and into October. We have a busy time here with people coming.
Yeah. Is there anything that you would say, just as a final thought, and what you found along the way, and what you're looking forward to just in the upcoming season? Well, first of all, rest, and then another season.
Well, the future is feeling it every day. What should we do? Where should we go? And how should we do it? And where should we change? Where do we need to change so that we keep a simple life and keep a strong, healthy life? But feeling out and sensing, what change needs to be done, and when do we need to do it, and how are we going to do it? And so not deciding where we're going to go, but trying to see where we should change, because that's what we need to do. It's our lives should be changed, and our lives should be changing so that it's not the same thing every year. It's a new thing and a new life every year, so that we progress in every way. So
Absolutely.
And I don't think we've ever been the same. And actually, sometimes I see major progress, and other people look at and they see part of the mess, but I can always look at, and I think that the progress has been marvelously fantastic. And somebody else says, oh, but you didn't do that and that. And I said, because you don't look at all the stuff that was done. It's just different. But I think we progress all the time.
Yeah, I think so too.
even though last year half of our crop had codling moth, and this year about 5%, you know, that's a huge improvement. And whether the industry appreciates that or not, it doesn't matter. We progress in a really big way. Our crop hasn't been infested nearly as badly as last year. So
Awesome.
I'm really happy what's happened this year with our apples. So, you know.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
I know.
Well, that's a pleasure to talk. Thank you, Farley. Thank you, Selina.
I'll see you again.
Imagine so.
Yep, thanks for coming, Farley.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Making It Here. All the best.
Until next time.